Hello class, and welcome to our next lecture on types of sentences. So let's begin. Now when we talk about types of sentences, I'm going to focus on the four major types, which are simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and compound complex sentences. So I'll explain each of these with examples in detail. So the first one is a simple sentence. A simple sentence is also known as an independent clause. It's independent because it can stand on its own, stand alone by itself, and it makes perfect sense. So it has at least a subject and a verb. Well, I'm sure you guys remember what a subject and a verb is, right? Well, a subject is what? Yeah, the thing or the person doing the action, and the verb is actually the action. So an independent clause has at least one subject and one verb for it to be called a clause. An independent one is because it can stand on its own, it is a complete thought, and it makes perfect sense. So let's look at some of the examples. I like apples. A complete thought. One simple sentence. It has the subject I and the verb like. The second example, I like apples and oranges. It's longer, but it still has the subject I and the verb like. So it is still one single independent clause, one complete thought, one simple sentence. My brother and I like apples. This time you have my brother and I being the subject for the verb like. You can have more than one, and it's called a compound subject. Doesn't matter, it is still the subject, my brother and I, and you have the verb like apples. Still one single independent clause. Number 4, my brother and I like apples and oranges and eat them every day. The sentence has become really long now, but still, my brother and I act as the subject, like and eat. More than one verb, but still, my brother and I like and eat them every day. It is still one independent clause that can stand by itself. It is a complete thought, and it makes sense by itself. One simple sentence. Okay? So what about compound sentences? Well, compound sentence then is a sentence that has two independent clauses. It has two independent clauses this time, joined by a coordinator. What's a coordinator? Well, for you to remember, there's this acronym fanboys. Okay? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. Okay, so two independent clauses joined by this coordinator, okay, which is always preceded by a comma. So you have a comma, then the coordinator. So one independent clause, comma, coordinator, second independent clause. So let's look at the examples. I like apples and he likes oranges. You have the subject I with like and the subject he with the verb likes. So I like apples is one independent clause. He likes oranges is another independent clause. Both of them can stand on their own and makes perfect sense. Okay, and it's joined by a coordinator and. Coordinators make both these independent clauses equal. Okay, so I like apples and he likes oranges. Number 2, I eat apples, but he doesn't eat apples. Subject I with verb eat, subject E with doesn't eat verb. I eat apples, he doesn't eat apples, two independent clauses, two complete thoughts, joined by the coordinator but. He dislikes apples, one independent clause. He ate one, another independent clause, joined by the coordinator yet. Okay, that's a compound sentence. Notice that we have the coordinator here and, but why is it different from this one, this and, in a simple sentence? Well, I like apples and oranges. This and is not a coordinator because oranges is not an independent clause, right? It doesn't have a subject or a verb, so this and does not work as a coordinator. And this is not a compound sentence, it is one single simple sentence. This, on the other hand, joins two independent clauses and therefore is a coordinator, and this makes it one single compound sentence. Then what about complex sentences? Well, complex sentence is a little bit complex, okay? So you have one independent clause, right? Like one simple sentence, but it is joined by one or more dependent clauses. So this is a little different. It's not independent, it is dependent because it cannot stand on its own. It doesn't really make sense by itself, okay? So these are joined usually by a subordinator. Okay, a subordinator makes it unequal in importance. Independent clause more important than the dependent clause. So subordinators are like although, because, since, when, after, or it could be a relative pronoun like that, which, and who. So let's look at these examples. When he came home, his mother hugged him. Okay, so if you notice here, we still have subject and verb, subject and verb. That doesn't change. But in this sentence, his mother hugged him is the independent clause because it makes sense on its own. His mother hugged him. But when he came home doesn't really make sense. And this when he came home is a dependent clause because it depends on this independent clause. Here is the subordinator when, the relative pronoun. Okay, when. So when he came home, independent clause, his mother hugged him, independent clause. I clapped loudly when my son went up on stage. I clapped loudly, independent. When my son went up on stage, dependent, right? With the subordinator when. I love English, independent, because it is interesting, dependent clause, joined with the subordinator because. After she left, her parents arrived. After she left, dependent, because it doesn't make sense on its own. Her parents arrived, dependent clause. Now notice that when the sentence begins with a subordinator, like when and after here, it is always followed by a comma. So when it's dependent clause, comma, independent clause. But when it starts with the independent clause, you don't need a comma, followed by the dependent clause. Alright, now it's getting a little bit more complicated. What about compound complex? So yeah, you guessed it, it's a mix of both the compound sentence and the complex sentence. So in what way? Well, a compound complex sentence has two independent clauses, just like a compound sentence, and it also has one or more dependent clauses, like a complex sentence. So in this sentence, you can expect to see both coordinators, like fanboys, and also subordinators like although, because, since, when, and relative pronouns like that, which, and who. So let's look at these examples. Okay, looking at the first one. Can you guess which ones are the independent clauses and which one is the dependent clause? Yep, you guessed it. I haven't had the time to go lately, and I haven't found anyone to go with are the two independent clauses. And the dependent clause is although I like to go camping. So you can see that the two independent clauses have been joined by the coordinator and preceded by a comma. And the dependent clause starts with the subordinator, although, which of course then you must have a comma. Now what about example number 2? Can you guess which ones are the independent clauses and which one is the dependent clause? Yeah, this one is a little bit more complicated. Okay, the first independent clause is we decided that the movie was too violent, right? So that's an independent clause. It can stand on its own. What's the second independent clause? Okay, there's a clue here because you have the coordinator but. So our children, where's my verb? Yep, our children thought that we were wrong. Remember how between commas, these are like additional information. Okay, so without this, it would still make sense. Our children thought that we were wrong. This is additional information. So our children thought that we were wrong is actually the second independent clause. And our dependent clause is actually who like to watch scary movies with the subordinator who, a relative pronoun. So this is an example of a compound complex sentence. You have two independent clauses and one dependent clause. Yeah, that's a little bit complicated, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to see and identify. Okay, so in conclusion or the summary, these are the types of sentences. Okay, a simple sentence has one independent clause. That's it. A compound sentence has two independent clauses. That's it. Join with coordinators, remember. Complex sentence has one independent clause and you could have more than one dependent clause. Okay, joined with subordinators. A compound complex sentence then has two independent clauses and it can have more than one dependent clause. So you'll have both subordinators and coordinators. Right? Do you think you've got it? Now, do you think you could try to identify the types of sentences here? So we have 6 sentences. I want you to try to determine which ones are which types. So we have simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence, and compound complex sentence. Which one is which? So you can pause here and try the questions. Okay, you ready to hear the answers? Okay, so these are the answers. Okay, did you get them all right? Okay, just in case, I'm going to help explain a little bit, okay? So the first one is a simple sentence. Why? You have the subject, the teacher, walked into the classroom, greeted the students, and took attendance. So you have more than one verb here, but it's a compound verb. You still have the subject and the same subject for the same verbs. So this is actually one simple sentence, although it looks pretty long, right? Alright, the second sentence, Juan played football while Juanita went shopping. Now, Juan played football, one independent clause, while Juanita went shopping is a dependent clause because while is a subordinator, not a coordinator. So this is a complex sentence. Juan played football, that's one independent clause. Juanita went shopping is another independent clause joined by the coordinator, yet both these independent clauses are of equal importance. So this is a compound sentence. Number 4, the island was filled with many winding trails, a small lake, and dangerous wild pigs. What is it? Definitely a simple sentence. This and does not join another independent clause. We only have one independent clause in this sentence, so it is a simple sentence. Number 5, although Mexico has the better football team, it lost. It lost. Okay, it's a little missing here, but it lost is the independent clause. Although Mexico has the better football team is the dependent clause. So although is the subordinator, complex sentence. Number 6, after school we went to the stationery shop. Why is it a simple sentence? Don't we have the subordinator after? Good question. But look at after the subordinator after. It's just school. Is this a clause? Does it have a subject? Does it have a verb? No, it doesn't. So this is actually just a phrase. It is not a clause. So therefore, we went to the stationery shop is one single independent clause. After school is just a phrase, and it's not another dependent clause. Therefore, it is a simple sentence. Alright, do you get it? It's a little bit complicated, but you'll get easier. So that's about it, and I'll see you back in class. We'll do more exercises then. Thank you!